Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? We're back for another episode of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Austin. I'm the host. Going live 7 p.m. every single day, every single weekday, Monday through Friday. Here to bring you, I think right now we're going to talk about some of my tight end sleepers. This is actually the Patreon segment, so I need to go and make this private on the YouTube real quick. But we're going to be talking about my favorite tight ends, guys that I think are sleepers, guys that I think are just a bit under the radar and have some fantasy value. But we will get into that in just 1 second, and we are good. Perfect. Let's talk some tight ends, man. Let's get right into it. Talking about George Kittle. George Kittle, I was talking about him on my losers list in a couple segments ago. And, man, George Kittle really did not show up in this game against Arizona. Didn't really need to, obviously, just because this guy, Christian McCaffrey, cannot be stopped by anybody. 200 yards from scrimmage, 4 touchdowns in that game. George Kittle, his contribution to the offense, 1 reception for 9 yards on 1 target. So he was really just blocking out there in that game. It was very weird to see him not at least get a couple more targets. It was his lowest targets game in the entire season. He had 6 targets week 1, only 3 in week 2, had 9 in week 3 versus the Giants, and obviously popped off 7 receptions for 90 yards and 16 fantasy points. I know a lot of us fantasy owners were like, man, George Kittle's back. He's ready to make those contributions, and it's not the case. There will be games where he is just ready to be a blocking lineman. He's going to get all the snaps and all of the potential to make plays, but it just wasn't there. He's going to go up against the Cowboys in week 5, and I'm putting him on the sleepers right now just because of his terrible week, but I think he just has potential to pop off every single week. It's unfortunate. I would like my people that are watching to at least consider trading George Kittle. I know that he's really good, especially down the stretch. He could be really good in those playoff scenarios for fantasy, but I do like all the other tight ends, all the other top tight ends, the Hawkinsons, the Andrews, even the Sam Laportas, possibly just because of his role in the Lions offense over George Kittle. But he'll be playing in primetime, and it feels like primetime George Kittle just shows up, man. He's going to play Sunday Night Football on NBC versus the Dallas Cowboys. That's going to be a matchup. That's definitely game of the week. Cowboys versus 49ers, 2 elite defenses going to go at it. We're going to see what happens. I'm sure Dak Prescott is definitely going to throw a pick, but I think George Kittle just has potential in a primetime game to make some moves. I don't know if he's considered the biggest sleeper, but I have some other guys that I want to talk to y'all about from the tight end position, and that's going to start with Hunter Henry. Guys, Hunter Henry only rostered in 55.8% of ESPN fantasy leagues right now. He's the tight end number 6 at the moment. He was holding down that number 1 spot for a while, had 2 really big weeks in week 1 and week 2. 5 receptions for 56 yards and a touchdown in week 1. Had a crazy one-handed snag in that game. Obviously really big hands and just a big dude that's able to box out these smaller linebackers, smaller DBs that try to guard him. I really do like Hunter Henry and his potential just to make plays out there for Mac Jones. Mac Jones really doesn't have a lot of targets to throw to. But I think you do have to look at Hunter Henry for a lot of these matchups. He's going to be playing against the New Orleans Saints in week 5. Obviously, New Orleans Saints pretty solid on defense, but they've been giving up a good amount of points. No question about that. New Orleans Saints currently sitting at they are 2-2 right now. 2-2. With the easiest schedule in all of football. Only 2-2. Lost against the Packers and lost against the Buccaneers. Giving up about 17 points a game. They only gave up 17 to 20 points per game. Gave up 26 to Baker and the Buccaneers. Obviously very elite personnel on that offense with the Buccaneers, with obviously Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, guys like that. Even Cade Otton caught a touchdown in that game. So I do think Hunter Henry will have a chance. Hopefully Bill Belichick is motivated after that really embarrassing loss that they just took. That was a really bad one. They actually ended up benching Mac Jones that game. And hopefully Mac Jones will come back with the fire as well, looking for a guy like Hunter Henry to help him make some plays against this New Orleans defense. I do believe his primary defender, Hunter Henry, is going to be going up against Demario Davis, who is obviously a consummate professional at the linebacker position. Very, very good linebacker. Also a very big faith and Christian believer. Just lets God, play it out for him. Whatever happens, happens. But I think I just like Hunter Henry in this matchup, truthfully. It makes a lot of sense. They're going to be playing Sunday at 11 p.m. Mountain Time, wherever you guys are at. Obviously, just the early window on Sunday. Want to also talk about Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz, a guy playing for the Texans. Texans are my favorite team, and I thought he was going to immediately come in and make an impact and be like our best pass catcher, and he really hadn't done anything up until week 4, and I appreciated seeing him at least get he didn't really get the volume, but he did catch a touchdown in week 4. 3 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown, equated to 13.2 fantasy points. Only 3 targets in this game. His volume is definitely not good, but we saw how good he was with Dak. So I'm surprised that Stroud is not looking for him more. He's more looking for those wide receivers, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. But going up against Atlanta is having, I don't even know how I would go about saying this. Not priority issues, like identity issues. They're going through an identity crisis. I don't think Desmond Ridder is their guy, and their defense is giving it up too. Obviously just took a loss to the Jaguars in the London game. Their offense couldn't put up any points, and I just really like that. I really like that from the Texan side of the ball, because if Ritter's not able to do anything, and Ridder is definitely worse than CJ Stroud, then our Texans offense is going to be on offense a lot more than Atlanta. So maybe Dalton Schultz could hop in there and make some plays. I think he has the potential to do it. We've seen it so many times throughout his career. And just to remind you guys, let's just kind of look up his previous stats, because I know a lot of my Dalton Schultz owners are scared right now. Can this guy play? Obviously just put up 13 fantasy points in week 4, but throughout his career he is kind of a perennial good tight end. You know what I'm saying? A very, very good tight end. Last year 577 yards, the year before that 808 yards, 615 yards in the year before that. So he really has had a fantasy presence in fantasy football. Usually is going to finish around tight end 10, somewhere in that range. But I do like Dalton Schultz and think that he is going to be heating up as, these defenses are going to have to start focusing on Nico Collins. Nico Collins can't just go off every single game without the defense checking him and putting a target on him. This guy is good. Let's send more coverage at him. And I think Dalton Schultz and also Tank Dell will be the beneficiaries of that. Let's also talk about Sunday Night Football. Jake Ferguson, man. Jake Ferguson, rookie tight end, very, very good, and has pretty much gotten 7 targets in every single game, which is amazing. Is way better than probably the tight end that you're currently starting right now. By the way, guys, if you want to ask any questions about anything you guys are dealing with in fantasy football, I'm down to answer any questions in the comments. But talking about Jake Ferguson, coming off his best week so far, 7 receptions, 77 yards on 7 targets. That's God signs. 7-7-7-7. Lovely. Totaled 14.7 fantasy points, and he'll be going up against San Francisco. Obviously a pretty tough defense, but I just like him for his red zone prowess. He gets a lot of red zone targets, and he only has one touchdown so far, but Dak consistently is looking to throw it to him in the end zone just because he's a big target. Let's see his height, weight, stuff like that, so I can give you the exact, but he's definitely big. Definitely a big, strong guy. Currently sitting at 6'5", 252 out of Wisconsin. Was not very targeted or very much used in that Wisconsin offense in college, but now pulling up and getting a lot more love in the NFL. Some guys just translate better in the league rather than in college, and I think he is one of those guys. So those are my tight end sleepers for you guys. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some quarterbacks with good matchups that I really like. So make sure you come back. All right, guys, we are back. Let's talk about some quarterbacks in Week 5 that I really like, guys that I think have good matchups and basically are playing against bad teams. That's pretty much what we're going to be going over here. And starting off with Patrick Mahomes, going up against Minnesota. Man, Minnesota has been extra bad, lackluster on defense, and they're currently 1-3. They found a way to get a win versus the Panthers, but they made us sweat for it. Only won 21-13. Against possibly the worst team in the entire league. So definitely a defense that I'm going to want to be targeting. They gave up 20 points to Baker, 34 points to Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, 28 points to Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers, and then 13 points to Bryce Young and the Panthers, which we completely expect. That offense really just hasn't gotten going at all so far this season. But obviously going to be going up against the most talented QB in maybe the history of football in Patrick Mahomes. And I see them giving up, 35 plus to this team. They're going to be playing in the late window here on Sunday. And I don't see why Patrick Mahomes cannot have a massive fantasy day, probably finish as quarterback 1 in all of fantasy this week just because of this beautiful matchup that he has. Minnesota doesn't really have good coverage. They have Patrick Peterson, who's obviously a consummate professional at cornerback, but someone who definitely cannot handle anything that Patrick Mahomes has to throw at him. So I really do like Patrick Mahomes in that matchup. We also got the Eagles going up against the Rams. Rams have the PFF rated worst coverage in all of the league, and Jalen Hurts has 2 Batmans out there in Skinny Batman Devontae Smith and Swole Batman AJ Brown, who just had a massive day, went for like 175 yards and 2 touchdowns, and right after AJ Brown gets drug tested. I was talking about that earlier on the Patreon. Super funny situation. I feel like anytime a player has a big day, a drug test is just randomly incoming. Like, what do you guys think that they're doing? Like, are they taking steroids? Are they, just taking steroids before the game? Or what drug is going to cause a guy to just pop off? I really don't know, but I just think it's funny. Jalen Hurts kind of on a roll right now and doing a lot of good things for his team. He carries the ball like 9 or 10 times a game pretty much. 9 carries week 1, 12 carries week 2, 10 carries week 3. 9 carries week 4, so he's definitely going to be a monster in the ground game. But I really am appreciating right now just how much he's like deferring to his wide receivers and making sure to get everybody involved. Against Washington, he had his first 300-yard day. Obviously, A.J. Brown accounted for a lot of those yards. Jalen Hurts went for 319 and 2 touchdowns, both to A.J. Brown. So, pretty good day. He's going to go up against the worst coverage in all of football in Week 5. So, I don't see how the Eagles don't put up a completely dominant performance, run the tush-push multiple times, and get out of here with a big win, probably by a sizable margin as well. Then, guys, probably the best matchup that we'll see in a while. Obviously, the New York Giants are struggling right now, down extremely bad. And, Brian Dable is probably on his way out very, very soon. In my opinion, his heart is not in it. And they're going to get embarrassed this week, most likely, by the Miami Dolphins, who do have the best offense in the entire league, statistically saying. And Tua Tagovailoa, I see him having a big day against them. He has had a couple weeks where he hasn't performed nearly as well, but the yards are just always going to be there for Tua. Week 1, 466 yards. Obviously, we all remember that game, the Tyreek game, where he went for 200 receiving yards, which was crazy. Came back 249 yards versus New England, 309 versus Denver. And then this past week, Week 4, didn't have that good of a game, threw a pick, and still threw for 282 yards, only equated to 14 fantasy points. But going up against the Giants, I don't see how Tua doesn't have a massive day against this team. We've seen pretty much every team just stomp on the Giants, and the only way that Tua doesn't have a big day is if they get up and have a really big lead going into like the second half, and then they just start pounding the ball, wasting clock. That's the type of stuff that we hate to see in fantasy football, man. Absolutely hate to see it. And it seems like it's been happening a lot. But Giants right now, 1-3. Somehow they squeaked out a victory versus the Arizona Cardinals and Josh Dobbs with that crazy 25-plus point comeback that they were able to lead in the second half. But since then, we really have seen nothing from Daniel Jones. Besides that 20 or 31-point performance that Daniel Jones put on in Week 2, since then, their offense has scored 15 total points. Goodness, that is bad. If that is any sign to what's to come, I'm sure against the Dolphins it's going to be even more scary, even more gruesome for this team. They also got to play the Bills right after that. So I'm not excited to see anything from the Giants offense, but I'm excited for all of our fantasy players to be going up against the Giants defense. And it just makes a lot of sense for them to be having big days. Obviously, we saw Deebo Samuel get loose against the Giants. We saw, who else? We saw DK Metcalf get loose against the Giants. He had 100-plus against them in a loss. They only scored 3 points in that game. I'm sure y'all remember that. And even the Cardinals and Josh Dobbs, who really at that point did not know the offense, I'm very sure of that. He even put up 228 yards and a touchdown. They also gave up 100 yards to James Conner on the ground. So I'm loving a couple defenses for anybody to go up against. The Broncos, the Giants, and the Bears. Make sure y'all watch out for that Thursday night football game that's upcoming, because the Bears defense is going to be out there and they're going to be giving up yardage for sure. Who plays against the Broncos? Who plays against the Broncos this week? What quarterback gets to feast on the Broncos defense? It's Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson going up against them. Even on ESPN, Denver's defense is ranked 32nd in power ranking for defense. So, truthfully, if you're in a deep league, I don't hate you starting Zach Wilson. We did see some better signs from him, and he took some accountability, which I really never seen Zach Wilson do. So maybe showing some maturity there. And he was looking like a gunslinger. He honestly has the arm to do it. I just don't know if he has a thing in between the ears to be a quarterback in this league for very long. We will just have to see. But I just wouldn't be surprised in any way if he had a really big day against this Broncos defense. We always talk about how, or the media, I feel like, portrays that the Broncos' strongest part of their team is their defense. They just gave up a ton of points to the Bears. They gave up 28. Obviously, Russ was able to lead a comeback, and the defense got a couple stops. But, this Jets team is nothing to play with. Former Rookie of the Year Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard. They have Tyler Conklin has been making waves. Don't hate starting him in any way just because I think Zach Wilson kind of relies on him in some situations to get the ball down the field. But I could definitely see Zach Wilson having a good day against the Broncos. Really only good guy they have in their secondary right now is Patrick Surtain. And he only plays on one side of the field. He's still going to get tested. He's probably going to have the Garrett Wilson duty this week. But definitely think Zach Wilson could have a pretty big day against them. Who else? I'm currently starting Sam Howell in my fantasy league right now. Sam Howell going up against the Chicago Bears, just a straight matchup play. It makes a lot of sense to me. Capable quarterback. I was talking about him in the live show, and I do like him in that game. Who else? Maybe one other guy. Also interesting, Kenny Pickett was upgraded to questionable instead of doubtful with that knee injury that he sustained. So hopefully they won't have to go to Mitch Trubisky when they're playing against Baltimore. I'm sure they'll probably lose that game as well. Still not going to have Deontay Johnson in that game either. Jared Goff is going to get to play against this Carolina team. Carolina has been pretty bad all around. They are currently are they 0-4 or 1-3? Yeah, they're 0-4 right now, and really haven't made any of these games too close. I guess the Vikings game was within a possession. Kind of made us sweat for it a little bit, and they played the Saints pretty decent, but they're just giving up a lot of points. Against the Seahawks, they gave up 37. Geno went for 296 in that game. Against I guess we don't really. Let's look at the Vikings game. Against the Vikings, gave up only 139 yards to Kirk, but Alexander Mattison ran for 95 yards himself, and it looks like they were just trying to pound the rock too. Justin Jefferson had a big touchdown that game, which is cool to see. Love Justin Jefferson. There's also been since Randy Moss and Marshall Faulk. Marshall Faulk. Those are the only two guys who have scored 24-plus fantasy points in the first 3 weeks of the season, and Justin Jefferson has also just done that, so he had a huge fantasy milestone that he hit. So that's really cool to see, but I could definitely, absolutely, positively see this Carolina Panthers team folding to this very explosive Detroit Lions offense for sure. If there's no questions or anything like that, we're just going to end the episode here. Hope y'all enjoyed my tight ends and my quarterback review. Make sure y'all subscribe, like, all those things. Interact with the channel. We appreciate all of that. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day.